The final piece of stained glass was installed in the front door this morning, a beautiful mosaic of a rising phoenix. This afternoon, my ex-wife is at my gate, crying in the pouring rain. I know this because I'm watching her on the Ultra HD monitor for camera 12, the one disguised as a garden lantern. She's pressing the call button over and over, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing at the cold metal. 3 years ago, that same finger pointed at the door of our tiny apartment and told me to get out. Now it's begging to be let in. She has no idea I'm not the only one living in this house. And she definitely doesn't know who is about to answer the door. My name is Jean Garcia. I'm 38 years old, and for the first time in my life, the calluses on my hands are fading. For 20 years, my hands were my life. They were covered in rich soil, stained with the green of crushed leaves, and smelled faintly of lavender and roses. I was a landscape artist, but not the kind you're thinking of. I didn't have a rich client list or a fancy company truck. I had a beat-up pickup, a talent for making things grow, and a heart full of dreams that didn't pay the bills. I thought that was enough. My wife, Isabella, thought it was a joke. I still remember the smell of our old apartment. It always smelled like damp earth and my cheap microwave dinners. We lived on the 3rd floor of a walk-up, with cracking paint and neighbors who yelled all night. I would come home after a long day of working in other people's beautiful yards, and Isabella would be sitting at the tiny kitchen table, scrolling through pictures of her friends' vacations in Europe. She never said a word, but her sighs were louder than a scream. She was suffocating in my world of dirt and dreams, and she was starting to hate me for it. The end came on a Tuesday. I had just lost a big contract because my old lawnmower finally died, and we couldn't afford to fix it. I came home with dirt under my fingernails and defeat in my heart. She was waiting for me, her bags already packed by the door. "I can't do this anymore, Jean," she said, her voice cold and empty. "My friends are buying houses, and I'm worried about our electricity getting shut off. I can't build a future on flowers and dirt." She looked at my hands, my dirty, calloused hands, with disgust. "I need a real man, not a gardener. What would you do if the person you promised to love forever told you your passion was worthless? Would you beg them to stay? Would you promise to change?" I just stood there, speechless, as she walked out of my life. She had no idea. No idea at all. She thought she was walking away from a failure, a man stuck in the mud. She couldn't have known that a letter had arrived that very morning. A letter that I had left unopened on the counter. The day she walked out was the day my real life was about to begin. You see, for months, I had been secretly working on something. I had entered a design competition, one of the biggest in the world, hosted by a reclusive tech billionaire who wanted to build the most spectacular private garden estate in America. The prize wasn't just money, it was a blank check to bring a vision to life. I had poured every ounce of my soul into my design. The letter I hadn't opened yet was from the billionaire's foundation. It told me that out of thousands of entries, my design, my dream built on flowers and dirt, had won. When Isabella left, I could have run after her. I could have waved that letter in her face and screamed, "Look, we're going to be rich." But in that moment, seeing the disgust in her eyes, I realized something. She didn't just hate that I was poor. She hated the part of me that loved the dirt more than the dollars. She didn't love me. She loved the idea of what I could give her. So, I let her go. I let her walk away believing I was nothing. I decided my victory would be my secret. It would be my revenge. And now, here she is, 3 years later, standing at the gate of my creation. I can see her on the screen. The expensive clothes she's wearing are soaked, her perfect hair is a mess, and her face is streaked with rain and tears. She looks tired, defeated. From my place in the study, I can see the marble floors and the grand fireplace. I am warm and dry. I am in control. The power has shifted, and the feeling is better than any dream I ever had. She presses the button again, a long, desperate buzz. I reach for the intercom on my desk, my hand steady. The time for watching is over. It's time for the show to begin. Let me know in the comments where you're watching this story from, and what you think I should say to her after all this time. Her voice comes through the speaker, tinny and pathetic. "Jean, I know you're in there. Please, I made a terrible mistake. Please, can I just talk to you?" I take a deep breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a full 10 seconds before I press the button to speak. "Hello, Isabella," I say, my voice calm and low, a voice she hasn't heard in 3 years. She lets out a small gasp, a sound of relief and hope. "Jean." "Oh, Jean, thank God," she cries. I cut her off. "I've been expecting you," I continue, my voice like ice. "But you've made a mistake. You're not here to see me." I pause, letting my words sink in, watching her confused face on the screen. "You're here to see him." The gate begins to swing open slowly, and she has no idea whose face she is about to see. If you want to find out who is waiting for Isabella on the other side of that gate, make sure you subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss what happens next. The heavy iron gate swung open without a sound, a silent invitation into a world she had never known. Isabella stepped onto the driveway, her eyes wide as she took in the endless garden, a paradise of flowers and trees that seemed impossible. She was looking for me, expecting me to be standing there, perhaps with a new, beautiful woman on my arm. But the grand, covered porch was empty, except for a single figure. It was an old man, sitting calmly in a motorized wheelchair with a warm blanket over his legs. He wasn't looking at the rain. He was looking directly at her, his eyes kind, but deep and knowing. This was him. The memory of the day she left is burned into my mind. I sat alone in our empty apartment for hours, the silence screaming at me. Finally, I picked up the letter she had ignored. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It wasn't a fancy document. It was a simple, handwritten note on thick paper. The words were a blur of legal terms and staggering numbers, but one sentence stood out. "Your vision for the Serenity Garden is precisely what my late wife would have wanted." It was signed, Arthur Finch. The reclusive billionaire. The man who had just changed my life, and he wanted to meet me the next day. I went to the meeting in my only clean shirt, smelling of soap instead of soil for the first time in years. I expected a cold businessman in a tall glass tower. Instead, I was led to a quiet hospital room. Arthur Finch was a small, frail man with a fire in his eyes. He told me about his wife, Eleanor, and her love for gardening. He didn't want a monument of stone and steel. He wanted to build a living memory, a paradise on earth to honor her. He looked at my designs, spread across his hospital bed. "You don't just design gardens, son," he said. "You create feelings." He then made me an offer that left me breathless. He didn't just want to hire me. He wanted a partner in his final, greatest project. He was old, he explained, with no children to carry on his legacy. "I want you to live on the estate as we build it," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "Pour your soul into this land. Help me build a tribute to my Eleanor." He looked me straight in the eye. "And when I'm gone, I want you to be its protector. The house, the gardens, the legacy, it will all be yours." He wasn't just offering me a job, he was offering me a life. Back in the present, Isabella stood frozen on the driveway, the rain plastering her expensive dress to her body. She stared at the old man on the porch, her mind unable to make sense of what she was seeing. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur Finch smiled, a gentle, patient expression on his face. He didn't need to raise his voice for his words to hit her like a punch. "I'm the man," he said softly, "who saw the king inside the gardener you threw away." Isabella's eyes darted from Arthur, to the mansion behind him, to the impossible gardens that surrounded her. The gardens weren't just pretty, they were a masterpiece. They were the soul of the boy she had left behind, now grown into something magnificent. A terrible understanding began to dawn on her face. Her mistake wasn't just that she'd left a man who won the lottery. She had left a true artist, a visionary, right before he was given the entire world as his canvas. She hadn't seen the treasure that was right in front of her. The last 3 years weren't spent in anger. They were spent in creation. I lived in a small cottage on the property while the main house was being built. Every day, I worked with Arthur. We didn't just build a garden, we built a friendship. I would push his wheelchair along the dirt paths, and we would talk for hours about trees, flowers, and his memories of Eleanor. As his health got worse, I became more than his gardener. I became his friend, his companion, his caretaker. I found a family in the one place I never expected. I finally decided it was time. I opened the large doors and stepped out onto the porch, standing behind Arthur's wheelchair and placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Isabella's eyes snapped to me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the girl I once loved. "Jean," she breathed. I ignored her and looked down at my friend. "This is Arthur Finch, Isabella," I said, my voice even and calm. "You might remember his name. You used to curse it every time you saw it in one of your fancy magazines, complaining about how unfair the world was." That was what finally broke her. The memory of her own bitterness, now face to face with its consequences. She rushed forward, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at me like a beggar. "Jean, I was a fool," she cried, the rain mixing with her tears. "I was so stupid and selfish. I didn't understand you. I see it now. I see everything you tried to tell me." She looked around at the paradise I had built. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. Please, can you ever forgive me?" I looked down at the woman who had shattered my world, now begging to be let back in. This was it. The moment of perfect revenge. It was everything I had imagined. But then Arthur, the wise old man who had given me a second chance at life, reached up and patted my hand. "The choice is yours, Jean," he whispered, his voice for my ears only. "But remember what this place is. We built a home for things to grow. It is a place of life, not a place for poison." I looked from his kind eyes to her desperate ones. Forgiveness or vengeance? My decision now would not be about my past. It would be about my future. Arthur's words echoed in my ears, a place of growth, not a place of poison. I looked down at Isabella, soaked and shivering at the bottom of the steps. For 3 years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would feel a powerful, satisfying anger. I thought I would enjoy sending her away, broken and rejected, just like she had left me. But standing here now, a new man in a new life, all I felt was a quiet sadness. The anger was gone, burned away by the hard work and true friendship I had found. Vengeance felt like a poison, and I would not let it touch the paradise I had built. "There is no forgiveness for you to have, Isabella," I said, my voice gentle but firm. I saw her face fall, the last bit of hope draining from her eyes. She thought this was the end. "Because the man you hurt doesn't exist anymore." I took a step forward. "That poor gardener with weak dreams? He died the day you left." "But this place," I said, gesturing to the magnificent gardens around us, "this is a place of work, a place where things grow from nothing. If you want a second chance, you will not get it by begging. You will get it by working." She stared at me, her mind struggling to understand. This was not the simple yes or no she had prepared for. "Work," she stammered. "What do you mean?" I walked to the edge of the porch and pointed toward the valley beyond our gates, where the smokestacks of a small, struggling town were visible. Arthur's wife, Eleanor, didn't just love these gardens. She loved that town. She grew up there. Before he fell ill, Arthur started a project to rebuild its old, forgotten library and community center. His health failed before he could see it through. That is the job. You will finish what he started. My mind drifted back to a quiet afternoon with Arthur a year ago. He had shown me an old, faded photograph of a beautiful young woman with her arms full of books, surrounded by smiling children. It was his Eleanor, volunteering at the very library that now stood in ruins. "Anyone can build a mansion, Jean," Arthur had told me, his voice full of love and memory. "It's just money. But to build a community, a place where people can grow, that takes a soul. This garden is for me, but that library, that was for her." I turned my attention back to Isabella. Her face was a storm of confusion. She came here for a life of luxury, and I was offering her a life of service in a place she had spent her whole life trying to escape. "There are conditions," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "You will not live here in the mansion. There is a small, clean apartment above the old hardware store in town. That will be your home. You will be given a fair salary to live on, but not $1 more. You will manage the project, and you will report your progress to me, in person, once a week." I could see the war raging in her eyes. The pride, the greed, the desperation. She looked from my face, to the grand house, then back to my face. This was so much harder than a simple rejection. A rejection would have let her be the victim. This was a challenge. A test to see if there was anything left of the girl I once knew, or if she was truly lost to her own selfishness. After a long silence, she finally gave a single, defeated nod. "Okay, Jean," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll do it." She had accepted. The test had begun. A strange sense of peace settled over me. It felt right. It felt like something Eleanor would have approved of. But the moment was shattered when Arthur's private nurse, a kind woman named Maria, rushed out onto the porch. Her face was pale and full of worry. "Mr. Garcia, I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Finch needs to rest. And a call just came in from his lawyers. They said it's an emergency. It's about the will." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. The will was signed and sealed a year ago. What could be an emergency? I remembered the day in the lawyer's office. Arthur, frail but sharp, signing the documents that made me his heir. The main lawyer was a kind, older man, but his junior partner, a young, slick lawyer named Thorne, had watched me the entire time. He never smiled. His eyes were cold, and they held a look of deep jealousy and suspicion. He looked at me like I was a thief who had somehow pulled off the greatest heist in history. I never forgot that look. Maria wrung her hands, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They said a new claimant has come forward. A distant grandnephew of Mr. Finch's from out of state. Someone the family cut ties with decades ago. He is contesting the will. He is claiming that you are a fraud, Jean. That you took advantage of a sick old man and tricked him into giving you everything. The foundation of my entire world, everything I had just offered to share a piece of, was suddenly cracking beneath my feet. The battle I thought I had just won was a little skirmish. The real war was just beginning." Maria held out her phone, the lawyer's call still connected. "It's Mr. Thorne," she said. "He insisted on speaking with you." I took the phone, my hand no longer feeling steady. I put it to my ear, and Thorne's voice, as cold and sharp as I remembered, cut through the line. "Mr. Garcia," he said, wasting no time on pleasantries, "I suggest you prepare yourself. The family is prepared to prove in court that you are nothing but a common gardener who stole $1 billion fortune." The lawyer's words, "common thief," echoed in the sudden silence on the porch. The air, once filled with the fresh scent of rain, now felt heavy and suffocating. I looked at Arthur's face. He looked so fragile, a tired old man being attacked in his own home. All the anger I thought was gone came roaring back, but this time it wasn't for me. It was for him. It was a clean, protective fire. I took the phone from my ear, looked Thorne's name on the screen, and pressed the end call button. Turning to Arthur, I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Don't you worry, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "They have no idea who they're fighting." Isabella, who had been a silent witness to this new storm, took a hesitant step forward. "A nephew?" she asked, a strange look on her face. "Arthur, you never spoke of any family other than your late wife." Arthur sighed, a weary, sad sound. "He is from a poisoned branch of the family tree, my dear. My sister's son. A boy I have not seen in 30 years. Isabella's brow furrowed in thought. It was clear her mind was working, digging through a mental library of names and faces I never knew she had. "What's his name?" she asked, her voice urgent. Maria, the nurse, looked down at the notes she had taken from the lawyer's call. "The claimant's name is Marcus Thorne," she read, her voice quiet. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at Maria, then at Arthur, my mind refusing to accept the coincidence. "Thorne?" I asked. "Did you say his last name is Thorne? The same as the lawyer?" Maria nodded grimly. "Yes, Mr. Garcia. The man contesting the will is the son of Arthur's junior counsel, Mr. James Thorne. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a conspiracy. The lawyer attacking us was the father of the man who stood to gain everything." My mind flashed back to a cold winter afternoon. Arthur and I were in his study, looking through old photo albums. He had paused on one page, his finger tracing the outline of a young boy with cold, greedy eyes. "There are some people, Jean," Arthur had said quietly, "who are born with holes in their souls. They can never have enough. They just take and leave nothing but emptiness behind. He never told me the boy's name, but now I knew. Arthur had tried to cut the poison out of his life, but it had found a way to seep back in. The fight now moved from the porch to the study. Arthur, though physically weak, was a lion when it came to protecting his legacy. He has no legal claim, Jean. The will is ironclad, he said, his voice regaining its strength. But a man like that doesn't fight with the law. He fights with mud. He will drag our names, my Eleanor's name, through the papers. He will try to break us. He told me then about his private journals, dozens of books where he wrote down his thoughts every single day for the last 50 years. The proof of my clear mind and my love for you is in those pages, he said. Find them. I immediately called Arthur's senior lawyer, an old, trusted friend named Howard. He confirmed our fears. Thorne was a snake. He had already filed motions to freeze all of Arthur's assets pending the investigation. That meant everything would stop. The payroll for the estate staff, the donations to the hospital, and, most importantly, all the funding for Eleanor's library project in town. The nephew wasn't just attacking me. He was attacking the community Arthur and Eleanor loved. He was salting the earth, making sure nothing good could grow. Just as a wave of hopelessness began to wash over me, Isabella spoke. She had been standing silently by the window, but her voice was now sharp and clear. Marcus Thorne, she said. I remember him. Arthur and I both turned to look at her. A few years ago, I read an article about him in a financial magazine. He was part of a real estate scandal. The story was that he and his partners were tricking elderly people into selling their family homes for a fraction of their worth. They were never convicted, but the story was ugly. She had just handed me a shield. And a sword. I stared at her, genuinely surprised. I had never paid any attention to her obsession with the lives of the rich and powerful. I had seen it as shallow, as a sign of her unhappiness. But she hadn't just been looking at their vacations and their jewelry. She had been studying them, learning their secrets, their weaknesses. How? I asked, my voice full of disbelief. Do you remember something like that? She looked down at her hands, a flush of shame on her face. Because when you were learning the names of flowers, Jean, I was learning the names of the people who could afford to buy them. A plan began to form in my mind, a way to fight fire with fire. Thorne and his son were trying to paint me as a predator, a nobody who charmed his way into an old man's fortune. But what if I could prove that Marcus Thorne himself was the real predator? What if I could show the world that his entire life was built on taking advantage of the weak and the vulnerable? Isabella's memory was the key. We had to find the victims from that old scandal. We had to prove who the real thief was. I turned to Isabella, my decision made. The dynamic between us had changed forever. She wasn't the woman I needed to forgive or punish anymore. She was something else entirely. An ally. An asset. Isabella, I said, my voice serious and direct. The community center project is on hold. I saw a flash of disappointment in her eyes, but I continued before she could speak. You have a new job now. I looked her straight in the eye, a general speaking to his most unlikely soldier. Your job is to help me destroy Marcus Thorne. Are you in? I looked at Isabella, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Her face was still stained with tears, but her eyes, which had been full of desperation, now held a tiny, flickering flame. It was the look of a person with nothing left to lose and, for the first time, a real reason to fight. She wasn't begging for a mansion anymore. She was being offered a chance to burn down the man who had cornered us both. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about justice. A slow, determined nod was her only answer. Yes, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I'm in. The alliance was formed. The war had begun. That night, the grand library of the estate became our war room. The long, polished table, usually empty, was now covered with laptops and old financial magazines. The silence between Isabella and me was heavy, but it wasn't awkward. It was the focused silence of two soldiers preparing for battle. I watched her work, and I was amazed. She moved through websites and databases with a skill I never knew she had, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She knew which society blogs to read, which charity events to search. The world she had been obsessed with was now a map, and she was the expert navigator. Arthur, wrapped in a warm robe, had Maria push him into the library. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright with a fighting spirit. "The past is a weapon, Jean," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And my life is an arsenal." He gestured to a large painting of his wife, Eleanor, hanging above the fireplace. "Behind that painting is a safe. Inside, you will find my journals from the last 50 years. He looked at me, his expression serious. "Be careful. Reading another man's life, his secrets, his pains. It's a heavy burden to carry. But the truth is in there. Go find it." I swung the painting aside, worked the combination to the old iron safe, and pulled out the first journal. It was heavy, bound in dark green leather. I opened it to a random page from 5 years ago. Arthur's elegant handwriting filled the page. He wrote about a charity gala he had attended. He mentioned speaking with a heartbroken widow, a Mrs. Gable, who had just been forced to sell her family home. She told him a charming and handsome young man had tricked her, convincing her it was for the best. Arthur had felt sorry for her, but never knew the name of the man responsible. "Wait," Isabella said, her eyes glued to her laptop screen. "I found it." She turned the screen towards me. It was an online article from a high society magazine covering that exact same gala. She scrolled down to the photo gallery. There were pictures of smiling billionaires and politicians. And then, one photo made my blood run cold. It showed a much younger, smiling Marcus Thorne, standing by a table. On the table was a small, elegant name card that was perfectly in focus. It read, Eleanor Gable. Isabella had found the connection. The snake had a name, and now, so did his first victim. We had a name. Eleanor Gable. But that was 5 years ago. How could we possibly find her now? Marcus had taken her home. She could be anywhere in the country, or anywhere in the world. Thorne's lawyers were moving fast, freezing Arthur's accounts and preparing their case. We were on a clock, and we were chasing a ghost. I felt a familiar wave of frustration, the feeling of being up against a wall with no way to climb over. We had the beginning of a story, but we had no way to find its ending. What would you do in this situation? How would you find one person in a country of 300 million? My mind was racing, trying to think like a rich man, trying to find a clever solution. But the answer didn't come from my new life. It came from my old one. A memory from long ago, from a time when my hands were still covered in dirt. A memory of a small, perfect garden I had tended for a kind old woman who paid me with fresh-baked cookies and stories. She used to talk about her best friend, who had been tricked out of her home and had to move into a nursing home. My eyes shot open. "I know where she is," I said, my voice filled with a sudden, shocking certainty. Isabella looked at me, confused. "Or, at least, I know where she was." I explained the memory. The old woman's friend, the one who had lost her house in a shady deal. Her name had been Eleanor. Eleanor Gable. The nursing home was called Oakwood Meadows, a quiet place on the other side of town. My past, the life Isabella had called worthless, had just given us the key to our future. Isabella stared at me, a look of awe on her face. "Your old life," she said softly, her voice full of a new kind of respect. "All those small jobs, the people you met. I thought it was all so pointless. I thought you were stuck." She shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "But you weren't stuck, were you, Jean? You were planting seeds. You were building a different kind of wealth." It was the first time she had ever truly seen me. It was the first time she understood. The apology I had wanted for so long was finally given, not in words, but in that single moment of understanding. The next morning, we drove to Oakwood Meadows. The building was clean and quiet, but it smelled of sadness and disinfectant. We walked up to the front desk. "We're here to see Eleanor Gable," I said to the kind-faced receptionist. She looked up from her computer, her expression turning sad. "Oh," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. You just missed her. Mrs. Gable passed away 6 months ago." Defeat washed over me. We were too late. Our only witness was gone. As we turned to leave, the receptionist's voice stopped us. "Her son is here, though." He's in her room, cleaning out the last of her things. He might be able to help." We turned back, a tiny flicker of hope returning. Walking down the hallway towards us, carrying a box of old photographs, was Arthur's lawyer, Mr. Thorne. The world seemed to slow down. Mr. Thorne, the man trying to destroy me, the lawyer for the greedy nephew, stood before us in the quiet hallway of the nursing home, holding a cardboard box filled with old memories. He didn't look surprised to see us. He didn't even look angry. He just looked tired, like a man who had been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time. Isabella and I stood frozen, unable to speak. "Mr. Garcia," he said, his voice low and heavy with sadness, "I knew this day would come. I suppose it was only a matter of time before you found your way here." My mind was a whirlwind of confusion. This had to be a trick, another layer to his evil plan. "The receptionist said Eleanor Gable's son was here," I said, my voice sharp and full of suspicion. "Are you her son?" Mr. Thorne closed his eyes for a brief moment, a look of deep pain crossing his face. He gave a slow, sad nod. "Eleanor Gable was my mother," he confirmed, his voice cracking. The floor beneath me seemed to disappear. The man helping his son steal Arthur's fortune was the son of the woman his own son had scammed. The evil in this family was deeper and darker than I could have ever imagined. "My son, Marcus, he was always a disappointment," Mr. Thorne began to explain, his voice a low confession in the quiet hall. "He was born with his grandfather's greedy heart. He came to my mother when she was lonely and confused, after my father passed. He filled her head with lies about taxes she didn't owe and debts that weren't real. He clutched the box tighter. He had her sign papers she didn't understand. He stole her home, the home I grew up in, and left her with nothing. It broke her spirit. She was too ashamed to even tell me until it was too late. This made no sense. It was the question that was screaming in my mind. Isabella was the one brave enough to ask it. "If you know what your son is," she said, her voice shaking with anger, "if you know he's a monster who did that to his own grandmother, then why are you helping him? Why are you trying to do the same thing to Jean and Mr. Finch? Why would a man who had seen his own mother destroyed by this evil help his son do it all over again?" It was the question that would decide everything. Mr. Thorne looked down at the box, avoiding our eyes. He seemed to shrink before us, the powerful lawyer disappearing, leaving only a broken father. "My own father," he said, "taught me one thing above all else. You protect your family. You defend your blood, right or wrong. It's a poison that has been passed down in our family for generations, from father to son." He finally looked up, his eyes full of a terrible shame. "I tried to be a better man, a better father. But I failed. And my son knows it." The full, ugly truth came spilling out. "Marcus knows about mistakes I made early in my career," Thorne confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He has proof that could send me to prison. He is blackmailing me. He told me if I did not use my legal skills to win him this inheritance, he would expose me to the world. He gave me a choice, help him become a rich monster, or go to jail and lose everything. He wasn't just a villain. He was a trapped animal, being forced to do the bidding of his own evil child." He gently placed the cardboard box on a nearby bench and lifted the lid. On top of a pile of old, faded photographs was a thick stack of papers tied with a simple ribbon. "My mother kept everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the sales agreement for her house, with my son's signature on it. And this," he said, pulling out a small, worn diary, "is her journal. She wrote down every lie Marcus told her, every single day. He had the evidence. The proof that would not only win our case, but could send his own son to prison." With trembling hands, he held the box out to me. "A peace offering. A betrayal. An act of justice." "I can't do it," he whispered, his eyes pleading with me. "He is my son. My blood. I cannot be the man who sends him to jail. But I will not let him do to Arthur Finch what he did to my mother. I will not be a part of it." He pushed the box into my hands. "Take it," he urged. "Use it. Destroy him. It is the only justice my mother will ever get. Let the poison in my family end with me." I took the box. It felt heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of a family's dark history. This was the weapon. This was the end of the fight. I looked at this broken man and felt a strange sense of pity. He was a bad man, but he was also a son who loved his mother. "What will happen to you?" I asked. "Marcus will ruin you." Thorne simply shook his head. "My life was already ruined," he said. "I'm just choosing which legacy I want to leave behind." At that exact moment, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. My heart leaped into my throat. It was a text message from Maria, Arthur's nurse. My hands shook as I opened it. There was no greeting, no explanation. Just 3 terrifying words that made the entire world go silent. The message said, "Arthur is gone." The proof in my hands, the victory I was holding, suddenly felt worthless. It was too late. I was too late. The 3 words on the screen, "Arthur is gone," hit me with the force of a physical blow. The box of evidence slipped from my hands, its contents scattering across the sterile floor of the nursing home hallway. Papers and photographs, a lifetime of secrets, lay at my feet, but I couldn't see them. All I could see was Arthur's kind face, his warm smile. Gone. It couldn't be. Not now. Not when we were so close. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed Maria's number. Isabella knelt beside me, her hands quickly but gently gathering the precious evidence. "Jean. Thank God." Maria's voice was a choked sob on the other end of the line. "They took him." An ambulance, it looked official. They had papers signed by a judge, an emergency order. They said he was mentally unfit and needed to be moved to a private medical facility. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a health emergency. This was an abduction, wrapped in legal paper. "Marcus Thorne was with them," she cried. "He had this cruel smile on his face. They wouldn't tell me where they were taking him. They wouldn't let me go." The full, evil genius of their plan hit me. They weren't just trying to prove Arthur was a confused old man in court. They were using the law to make it a reality. They had physically removed him from his home, from his friends, from my protection. They had stolen him. Now they could control him, medicate him, and isolate him until he was exactly the confused old man they claimed he was. Where was he? Trapped in a hospital somewhere, alone and terrified? The thought filled me with a rage so pure it burned away my fear. We raced back to the mansion, the box of evidence now feeling like the only weapon in a war we were about to lose. Despair was a heavy fog in my mind. What good were old diaries against court orders and corrupt lawyers? But as we entered the quiet study, Isabella placed a hand on my arm. "We can't fight them on their terms, Jean," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "They control the law. We don't have time for a court battle. We have to fight their lie with a bigger truth. A truth the whole world can see." She was right. We weren't going to win this in a courtroom. We had to win it in people's hearts. My mind flashed back to a quiet evening with Arthur. We were watching the sunset from the porch, and he had been quiet for a long time. "You know, Jean," he had said, "my greatest fear isn't dying. It's being forgotten. Or worse, being remembered for something I'm not. It's the thought of being trapped inside my own mind, unable to tell the world who I really am." He had looked at me then, his eyes pleading. "Promise me, son. Don't ever let them take my voice." At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental. Now, I understood. It was a warning. Back in the library, we opened Mrs. Gable's diary. Her frail, looping handwriting told a story that made my heart ache. October 12th. Marcus visited today. He is such a charming young man. He says the new taxes will ruin me, and that I should sell the house to a special company he knows. He says he is protecting my future. Page after page, she detailed the web of lies he had spun, the fear he had created. It was a perfect, heartbreaking story of a predator and his prey. This was the truth that could set Arthur free. This was how we would give him back his voice. But how could we get this story to the world? The police would be too slow. Our lawyers were already fighting a losing battle. Isabella, using the knowledge she had gathered over years of studying the powerful, had an answer. "Sarah Jenkins," she said, pulling up an article on her phone. "She's an investigative reporter, a bulldog. She's famous for exposing corruption. She wrote the original story about Marcus's real estate scandal years ago, but she never had the proof to make it stick. Isabella looked at me, her eyes shining with a brilliant idea. Let's give her the proof. It was a race against the clock. We knew Thorne's father would be watching the estate. We were trapped. Getting the diary to this reporter in the city seemed impossible. We were just a gardener and a woman with a broken past. They were a powerful family of lawyers and thieves. They would be expecting us to make a move. They would have people watching every road, every car. How could we possibly escape without being seen? Every option seemed like a dead end. Then, an idea came to me. It was risky, but it was all we had. Mr. Thorne, the broken father, was still at the mansion, waiting in the study like a man waiting for his own sentence. I walked in and faced him. "Your son has taken my best friend," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "He has crossed a line you never wanted him to cross. You have a choice. You can let the poison of your family win, or you can do one last thing to fight it. We need a diversion. We need you to help us." He looked up at me, his face a mask of grief and regret, and gave a single nod. The plan was set. 10 minutes later, Mr. Thorne drove my new, expensive car out the main gates, a perfect decoy for anyone watching. At the same moment, Isabella and I climbed into my old beat-up gardening truck, the one I kept in the back barn. We slipped out through a hidden service road, the precious diary sitting on the seat between us. We were free. But as we turned onto the dark, empty highway, a pair of headlights flashed to life behind us. They had been waiting. The decoy hadn't worked. We were being followed. The headlights in my rearview mirror were like the eyes of a wolf, and my old truck felt like a slow, tired sheep. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through my veins. The truck, my faithful rust bucket, was no match for the sleek black sedan that was now glued to our bumper. Isabella clutched the box containing Mrs. Gable's diary, her knuckles white. "They're getting closer, Jean," she yelled over the roar of the engine. I stomped on the gas pedal, but the old truck had nothing left to give. The highway was a trap, and we were about to be caught. But a gardener knows more than just flowers. A gardener knows the land. My mind raced, not thinking about speed, but about the earth itself. I remembered the old forgotten back roads, the dirt paths that cut through the forests, roads that no map would ever show you. "Hold on to that box," I yelled, and without another thought, I cranked the wheel hard to the right. We flew off the smooth asphalt of the highway and crashed onto a bumpy, unmarked dirt road. The truck rattled and shook, every bolt groaning in protest, but it felt at home here, in the dirt. I remember the day I bought this truck, over 10 years ago. It took every last dollar I had. Isabella had hated it. She called it an embarrassment, a pile of junk that smelled like grass and oil. She wanted a new, shiny car, a symbol of a life we didn't have. But to me, this truck was a symbol of my freedom, of my hard work. It was the one thing in the world that was truly mine. Tonight, the rust bucket she had despised was the very thing saving our lives. I gave the dashboard a grateful pat. We were going to make it. We bounced along the dark, winding path for what felt like an eternity. The headlights of the black sedan disappeared behind us, swallowed by the forest. We were safe, for the moment. But we were also lost. We were in the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night, with a billionaire's future resting in a cardboard box on the seat. The immediate danger was gone, but a new, creeping fear took its place. We had escaped the wolves, but we were now lost in the woods. Could we find our way out before they found us again? Isabella, however, was not panicking. She was a different person from the crying, desperate woman at my gate. A fire had been lit inside her. She had her phone out, the bright screen lighting up her determined face. "The GPS is useless out here," she said, "but the satellite map still works. If we stay on this path and head east, we should hit an old county highway. It's the long way to the city, but they'll never think to look for us there." She had gone from being a passenger in her own life to being my co-pilot. She was navigating us through the darkness. With the immediate threat gone, my thoughts returned to Arthur. A wave of guilt washed over me, so strong it almost made me sick. He was alone, trapped, and it was my fault. I had brought this war to his doorstep. "I should have been there," I said to Isabella, the words thick with pain. "I should have protected him better." She reached across the seat and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was not romantic. It was supportive, the touch of a partner. "This is not your fault, Jean," she said softly. "This is their evil, not yours. We are going to fix this. We are going to get him back." We finally reached the city as the first gray light of dawn was breaking over the skyscrapers. We couldn't go to the news station's main office. It would be the first place Marcus and his father would look. Isabella, once again, had a plan. She directed me to a small, 24-hour diner in a quiet part of the city. "Park here and wait for me," she said, her voice full of a confidence I had never heard before. "I'll be right back." I watched her walk into the warm, yellow light of the diner, my mind full of questions. Who did she know here? A few minutes later, Isabella walked out, followed by a woman with short, messy hair and a tired, intelligent face. The woman was wearing a trench coat and holding a steaming cup of coffee. It was Sarah Jenkins, the reporter. Isabella had an old, private number for her and had summoned her to this secret meeting. Sarah looked at me, then at the old truck, her eyes sharp and skeptical. "You've got my attention," she said, her voice gravelly from lack of sleep. "You have 2 minutes to convince me this is the story of a lifetime." I didn't try to explain. I didn't try to convince her. I simply reached into the cardboard box, took out Mrs. Gable's small, leather-bound diary, and handed it to her. She took it, a doubtful look on her face, and opened it to the first page. I watched as her expression changed. The skepticism melted away, replaced by a focused, hungry intensity. It was the look of a wolf who had just caught the scent of blood. She looked up from the diary, her eyes burning with a righteous fire. "This is it," she whispered. "This is the proof I've needed for 5 years." Sarah Jenkins snapped the diary shut. Her entire energy shifted. She was no longer a tired reporter. She was a hunter who had her prey in her sights. "Okay," she said, "all business now. I'm running this story. I'll have it on the front page of our website in 2 hours. Marcus Thorne and his father are finished." A huge wave of relief washed over me. We had done it. We had won. But just as I allowed myself to feel that hope, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. "We have a problem," she said, looking at me with horrified eyes. "A big one. Arthur Finch just had a massive stroke. He's in critical condition. He can't speak." The words on Sarah's phone screen hit me harder than any punch. Arthur has had a massive stroke. The small victory we had just won, the feeling of hope from the diary, all of it turned to ash in my mouth. My friend, the man who had saved my life, was lying in a hospital bed, silenced. The one person who could stand up and tell the world the truth had just had his voice stolen from him. My revenge, my fight for the will, it all felt so small and stupid now. All that mattered was Arthur. But Sarah Jenkins wasn't a gardener who felt things with his heart. She was a reporter who saw the world in facts and patterns. Her eyes narrowed, her face hardening. "A stroke," she said, her voice sharp with suspicion. "The day after he is forcibly taken from his home by the very people trying to prove he is mentally unfit? That's not a coincidence, Jean. That's a tactic." Her words hung in the air, a terrible and horrifying thought. What if this wasn't a natural event? What if they had done something to him? The fight for Arthur's fortune had just become a fight for his life. Sarah took control, her mind moving 100 miles an hour. "The diary is a powerful story about Marcus's past," she said, tapping her pen on the table. "But an illegal abduction and a suspicious medical emergency? That's the story that can bring down empires. I'm a reporter, Mr. Garcia, and I have sources. Doctors, nurses, hospital administrators. People who hate seeing the rich and powerful get away with evil. I can find out where they are holding him. I just need a little time." Hope. It was a tiny flicker in a hurricane of darkness, but it was there. Suddenly, a memory broke through the fog of my fear. A conversation with Arthur from months ago. He had been having a weak day, his hands trembling slightly. "Jean," he had said, his voice quiet, "if anything ever happens to me, if I'm ever not myself and can't speak for what I want, there's a doctor. My oldest and dearest friend, Dr. Lena Hansen. She was my wife's doctor. She is the only one in this world I trust with my life. Her number is in my personal address book, in my study. Arthur, in his wisdom, had a secret ally. He had a failsafe. "We need to get back to the mansion," I said, my voice suddenly full of purpose. "We need to get that address book. We need to find Dr. Hansen." The mission had changed. We weren't just trying to expose a thief anymore. We were trying to rescue our friend. We had to get to this doctor, the only person who could legally fight Marcus's court order, the only person who could tell the world that Arthur was of sound mind, and the only person who could save his life. But how could we get back inside the one place we were now locked out of? Sarah shook her head, bringing me back to reality. "You can't, Jean. The second they moved Arthur, Thorne's father would have filed a court order barring you from the property. He'll claim you're a threat. The police will be watching the gates. The mansion is a fortress now, and you are the enemy. It's a trap." She was right. The one place that held the key to saving Arthur was the one place on Earth I could no longer go. We were checkmated. Every move we made, they were already 2 steps ahead. "I can get in," a quiet voice said. We both turned to look at Isabella. She had been silent, her face pale, but now her eyes were focused and clear. "When I came to the gate yesterday, I noticed the security system. It's a Davenport Industries model. My father's company installed them for the richest families for 30 years. A look of shame crossed her face. "Growing up, I learned things I shouldn't have. I know the old master override codes, the ones they give to the family for emergencies." Her past, the one built on secrets and privilege, was now our only hope. The plan was terrifyingly simple. It was a heist. That night, under the cover of darkness, Isabella would try to break into the most secure private home in the state. Sarah Jenkins would use her sources to find a current address for Dr. Lena Hansen. My job was to be the lookout, to coordinate, to pray that this desperate, crazy plan would actually work. We were an impossible team, the gardener, the reporter, and the runaway bride, fighting a war against an army of lawyers and monsters. Before we left the diner, Sarah looked at me, her face grim but determined. "Don't you worry about the press," she said. "I'm still publishing the story about the diary tonight. It will be the first shot in this war. By the time the sun rises tomorrow, the entire world will know that Marcus Thorne is a predator who preys on the elderly. It will be the storm that gives you the cover you need to get inside." The fight was now on 2 fronts, one public, one secret. One for Arthur's name, and one for his life. Hours later, we were there, hiding in the darkness of the woods that bordered the grand estate. Isabella crept towards a small service gate at the back of the property, the one used by the kitchen staff. I watched through binoculars, my heart pounding in my chest. She took a deep breath and began typing a long sequence of numbers into the keypad. A small red light blinked. "Access denied." My heart sank. She tried a second, older code. Red light again. "Access denied." One more try, and a silent alarm would alert Marcus's security. Her hands trembling, she typed in the final code she knew, the oldest one, the one her father had called the skeleton key. She pressed the final button and looked up. The fate of everything rested on the color of a tiny light. My breath caught in my throat. I watched through the binoculars, my world shrinking to the size of a tiny, blinking light. Isabella stood frozen before the keypad, her hand still outstretched. Red meant failure, alarms, the end of all our hopes. Green meant a fighting chance. The light flickered one last time, and then, with a soft click that I could feel even from 100 yards away, it turned a brilliant, beautiful green. The gate was open. Isabella slipped through the opening and disappeared into the darkness of the gardens she had once unknowingly inspired. She moved through the night with a purpose I had never seen in her before. She was no longer a frightened woman. She was a soldier on a mission. She knew the layout of these grand houses, the places where security was weakest. She found a window in the study that was left unlocked, just as Arthur and I always left it. Minutes later, she was back out, clutching a small, leather-bound address book in her hand. She had done it. She had walked into the lion's den and stolen the one thing that could save us all. We didn't waste a second. We sent a picture of the contact page to Sarah Jenkins. While we drove, Sarah used her reporter's magic to track down the doctor. Dr. Lena Hansen wasn't at a local hospital. She was a semi-retired specialist at a famous clinic 3 hours away. We got back into my old faithful truck, the diary and the address book sitting on the seat between us like two holy relics, and we drove into the rising sun. Every mile that passed, I prayed that we weren't too late. We found Dr. Hansen in her small, neat office. She was a sharp, intelligent woman in her 70s with eyes that missed nothing. We told her everything. We told her about Marcus, the will, the abduction, and the box of evidence. When we finally got to the news of Arthur's sudden stroke, she held up a hand, stopping me. "A stroke," she said, a look of deep suspicion on her face. "That's impossible. I gave Arthur a full physical last week. The man's heart is as strong as an ox." She stood up and began pacing her office. "He's on a specific medication for his blood pressure," she said, thinking out loud. "If someone were to maliciously double the dosage, it would create a temporary paralysis. It would mimic the exact symptoms of a massive stroke, leaving him unable to speak or move, without causing any permanent damage." She stopped and looked at us, her eyes blazing with a cold fury. "They didn't just take him, Mr. Garcia. They poisoned him. It wasn't a tragedy. It was an attempted murder. This changed everything. Arthur wasn't dying. He was a prisoner being drugged into silence. As his primary physician, Dr. Hansen had the legal power to demand access to her patient. The corrupt court order meant nothing against her authority. The final battle plan was formed. Sarah Jenkins would publish her explosive story about the diary, creating a media firestorm that would engulf Marcus Thorne. At the exact same moment, Dr. Hansen, with me and Isabella by her side, would arrive at the private hospital with the police as her escort to save her patient. It happened all at once. Sarah's story hit the internet with the force of a bomb. The headline was everywhere: "Billionaire's heir, Marcus Thorne, accused in elder abuse scandal that targeted his own grandmother." As Marcus was being buried in that avalanche of truth, we arrived at the hospital. Dr. Hansen, armed with her medical authority and a righteous fury, swept past the guards. We found Arthur's room. Marcus and his father were inside, caught completely by surprise. At the sight of us, with 2 police officers behind us, their faces turned to masks of pure terror. A few months later, the world was quiet again. The Thorne family was ruined, tangled in a web of legal battles they could never win. Marcus and his father were facing prison time. The will was secure. And Arthur was home. He sat on the porch in his wheelchair, weaker, but with the same fire in his eyes. He watched as Isabella, no longer a broken woman but a confident leader, directed a team of volunteers planting the first flowers at the new Eleanor Finch Community Library. She had found her purpose, not in a mansion, but in a small town. And I was home, too. I knelt in the dirt of the main garden, my hands where they had always belonged. I was the guardian of a great fortune, but I was still a gardener. Isabella walked over, a genuine, warm smile on her face. We spoke not of the past, but of the future, of the projects we were building. The love we once had was gone, replaced by something quieter, stronger, and more real, a partnership built on respect and a shared mission to do good. I had my revenge, but the victory wasn't in their defeat. It was in this peaceful, quiet moment. This story is a reminder that the deepest wounds can inspire the greatest growth. True wealth isn't something you have, it's something you build. It's the community you nurture, the people you protect, and the good you plant in the world, hoping it will one day bloom. If this story touched your heart, and if you believe in second chances, please take a moment to hit that like button, share it with a friend who needs a story of hope, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Thank you for watching.